even as someone who asks questions for a living on TV, there's never enough time to ask all the questions that are swirling around in my head. So I wanted to use this space as a place to chat about all the things I'm curious about. And with everything going on in the world right now, it seemed necessary to start this series by speaking with a rabbi I admire. So joining me today is best-selling author and senior rabbi of one of the largest synagogues in the world. Welcome, Rabbi Steve Leder. Hi, Steve. Thank you for being here.
We did it.
We did it.
Great to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you. I feel weird calling you upon first time Steve, but I heard that's what you like to be called.
Call me Steve. Call me Rabbi Steve, whatever you want. It's all good.
Well, I had to remember because I had a flashback to what I called my ministers growing up. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think I called them Mr. I think I called them Reverend or so in my head, it's like old teachers. I can't look at someone like you. It's a good problem to have, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
The teachers still get mad at me because I cannot help myself. So it's always Mr. and Mrs. And they're like, Sarah, seriously? Like you're as old as we were when we were teaching you. You can stop now.
Yeah. No, I get it. I completely understand. I'm gracious about whatever anyone wants to call me. It doesn't matter, really. It doesn't.
Now, Steve, where are you from? Did you grow up in California?
No, I grew up in Minneapolis. I grew up in a suburb of Minneapolis called St. Louis Park. And it was this little Jewish enclave in the middle of, Lutheran Minnesota. And I went to a, public school. Did you ever see the Coen Brothers movie, A Serious Man?
I think I did. I don't think I remember it vividly, but I know I saw parts of that at least.
About this professor's life who falls apart, and it's the suburbs, Jewish. Joel and Ethan Coen grew up about 5 blocks away from me, and that movie is an hallucination of my childhood. I mean, it's perfect.
Now I got to go watch it because
and the Big Lebowski, Charles Lebowski lived at the end of my block. The Big Lebowski lived at the end of my block. And so I went to school with those guys, Tom Friedman, Al Franken. It was
my gosh.
crazy little incubator. And if you had any creative aspirations, you had to get out after high school. You had to get out.
Right.
Where did you grow up?
Iowa. So another place where you have to get out. Newton, Iowa. It's it was about 15,000 people, 30 miles east of Des Moines.
Is that where Maytag?
Yes, that's why we were there. My dad worked for Maytag, right before they had me, they were brought home to headquarters. And so my dad's actually from Pennsylvania, but they ended up in Newton, Iowa.
I've been there.
Oh my gosh.
I have. All 3 of my sisters went to Drake. I have 3 older sisters. They all went to Drake. And then my parents, I don't know exactly how, but made really good friends with some executive at Maytag. And whenever we'd go visit the girls at Drake, we would always go visit these people in Newton.
Okay, so funny enough, we're 3 girls and a boy too. My brother's the youngest.
I have a younger brother though.
Okay. So you got another sibling on me, but I went to Smith College in Massachusetts, and my sophomore year, I had kind of a reckoning of what am I doing with my life, and came home and went to Drake for 1 year. So I always joke I spent my junior year abroad at Drake.
Yeah. I just remember even like though Minneapolis is far from, a cultural hub. When my sisters would come home from Drake to Minneapolis, it was like they were coming home to Paris or something. It was just, it was big. But that's my world. That's where I come from, and that's in many ways, not professionally so much, but I miss fishing in the lakes and the streams, and I know how to shuck corn, and
I did tasseled corn in the summer.
I worked. My dad and my uncle owned a junkyard called Leder Brothers Metal. There were 7 of us in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, and that's how everybody lived.
It sounds about right.
Yeah.
So it's funny because when you mentioned Drake, I don't want to digress into too much of a story, but I loved studying in Smith. You had no core requirements, and I was a government major. So my whole schedule was religion, theater, and government for no reason. So there were these courses with a Rabbi Fink at Drake, and I went to take them because he was teaching about Rabbi Kushner,
Oh,
who
Harold Kushner. Yeah.
Harold Kushner, whose audience, I remember my mom showing me, I was raised Protestant, and she said Kushner's audience is strangely primarily Christian.
Yeah.
And so there was a course on all his books, and I'd already read all his books. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh my gosh, I get a chance to read these again and dig in. And I get there the first day and I'm sitting in class, and I'm the type that has to be in front, has to ask questions. I start right away. I was like, Rabbi, I'm not Jewish. And he laughed. He goes, oh, yeah. And the whole class started to laugh. And I was like, oh, you knew that? And he goes, well, you have a cross around your neck, which will give you away every time. From that point on, first of all, he totally had my number, because everyone
Yeah.
else in that class, I didn't realize, were all Jewish kids. I didn't realize that's the kind of class they all wanted, because I just knew the books.
Right.
I followed him across campus one day, telling him how I'd been on a cruise and met a boy from Israel, and I thought it was God telling me I should be Jewish. And he was like, so there's a lot to unpack here. Like, he used to laugh at me. Now, wait, fast
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
I'm at the Today Show, and I'm a production coordinator. And my boss says, my rabbi from camp, which that time I did not comprehend camps in the Northeast and stuff. He said, is coming. I need you to give him a tour. It's he and his family. They are kosher, and there's like 7 of them and all this stuff. He's like, please just, he means a lot to me. So I
Yeah.
go to the studio and I proceed to give one of my whirlwind tours. The kids have their own foods because they can't eat anything. And all of a sudden something comes up about Iowa and Drake. And I said, yeah, this rabbi who was a professor who I just loved moved to Maryland. He goes, oh, who is he? And I thought, this sounds like you're from Iowa. Do you know my friend? Like that kind of thing. And I go, oh, his name was Rabbi Fink. He goes, oh, Steve Fink. He is one of our best friends. They knew him.
Yeah.
So then
small world.
The tour is an hour and a half long. I proceed to hug this man because I'm a hugger and toucher. The kids are laughing.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I come in, I'm talking to my boss, and he and his wife were so lovely. They just got back in their car. They were smiling, really cute. I said, oh my gosh, your rabbi was amazing. His whole family, like, I love them. The tour was like 2 hours long. He goes, can you promise me something, Sara? You didn't hug him, did you? And I was like, well, yeah, I felt so close at the end. He's like, you know, you're not supposed to hug him. And I was like, I had no idea.
No, by the way, that is a very small percentage of the Jewish world that lives in that kind of Amish Jewish way.
Yes.
Most of us are not like that, but what you did learn is what a small world the rabbinical is. I mean, there just aren't that many of us, so it's a tiny world. But what years were you at the Today Show?
I was at the Today Show from 2002 to 2013.
13. That was I think that was just before I started doing segments for them. Was Tammy, who was the EP of the Fourth Hour? Was it Tammy?
Tammy Filler.
Yeah,
She was my boss. Yeah.
Oh, really? That's great. So Tammy is like my dear friend. Now she's out here.
Yes.
And we got the girls into the right schools. And I had breakfast with her, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago.
She will laugh if you say you saw Sara, because she's the one that gave me my chance on the Fourth Hour, put me on air. She's amazing.
She gave me my chance.
Well, with you, I was just going to say that's what the Today Show did best. They found really good guests. Like, they always had the gold standard.
It's a really good show, but Tammy changed my trajectory for sure. And I've in every way I can tried to help her as well, but she's a great person. I'm going to call her after this and say hi for you. Okay.
She is going to laugh so hard. This is crazy. Okay, yeah. I want to get started so I don't lose track of some of this, because I have so many questions. Okay. I'm going to do the intro after we're done. So I'll just get right into this.
Okay.
So right now, more than ever, we're sensing the rise in antisemitism, and we've seen violent attacks, superstars spewing hate, politicians stoking conspiracy theories. Now, religion has been weaponized since the beginning of time, so that's not new. But tell us, in your view, the current state of anti-Semitism for Jewish people and how it's shifted in recent years.
Well, you're right, Sara. It is the oldest of stories. Anti-Semitism is the oldest of isms, the oldest of stories. And Jews have been marginalized ever since, really, they revolted against paganism, theologically, of course, and ever since Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, essentially making it the official religion of the non-Asian world. So, yes, we've lived on the margins. And when the majoritarian culture is threatened, they tend to point to the margins to blame. So that's not a new dynamic. The new dynamic is in America and in the world. Let's start with the world. We'll do sort of macro to micro. The new dynamic in the world is social media, which is an accelerant and one that is impossible to fully control, which we all know. So that is a new dynamic in terms of how quickly anti-Semitic sentiment, tropes, activities can be transmitted globally. That's number one. Number two, in America specifically, for reasons we can get into if you'd like, we're beginning to see the normalization of Jew hatred. I don't really use the term anti-Semitism because it's too clean.
Okay.
And there are a lot of Semites. Arabs are Semites, etc. It's Jew hatred. And it has become now normalized, legitimized. On the far right, which is not so much of a surprise, honestly, because white supremacy has always been anti-Jewish, despite the fact that many Jews are white. So it's really not about white supremacy.
Right.
It's about Christian white supremacy. And on the other side of it, on the far left, we have tremendous anti-Semitism now on college campuses, in Congress, and it's becoming normalized. It's becoming okay. Why? Because it's sort of open season in America now on white privileged people. And so if you can cast or frame Jews not as Jews, not as a marginalized people, but as just white privileged people, then you can openly hate them in America and nobody cares. Which I find particularly sad when you see marginalized people othering marginalized people. That's like a white supremacist dream come true. Oh, we can get other minority marginalized people to marginalize Jews. We can get them warring with each other. What could be better? So ultimately, I think that's the difference. There was a long period of time where anti-Semitism or Jew hatred was completely and totally rejected by America as a political doctrine or a social doctrine. But that pendulum is not even beginning, it is swinging the other way, and it is becoming legitimized. A lot of it has to do with class. You know, I was on CBS Sunday Morning 2 weeks ago, and I talked about, are some Jews privileged? Yes. Is Dave Chappelle and Ye and Kyrie, and are they privileged? Yes. We're all privileged in some way, and we are all disadvantaged in some ways. That's what it means to be human. And by the way, the fallacy of this white privilege thing is ridiculous. More than half the Jews in Israel are people of color. But you wouldn't know that if you're just dealing with tropes. So this, I think, is what's new, is the normalization of it from the left and the right, turning it into class warfare more than anything else. And of course, as I said, the accelerant of social media makes it far more difficult to respond to.
Well, it feels like the rise in the left is the shocking part. And the Anti-Defamation League even had a definition of racism that included skin color, and that's it. And it used to have a more comprehensive one that described ethnicity, etc. And they changed it, I think, because of the times we're living in, and they had to go back again because it contributes to this problem. And that leads me to my next question. When we think of racism, we usually think about people being targeted for the color of their skin, but often Jewish people are light skinned. You mentioned in other places they aren't necessarily, but here a lot of people are lighter skinned, which seems to confuse people as to how they can be marginalized. What is the difference between race and religion as it relates to discrimination in this case?
Well, Judaism is the religion of the tribe known as the Jews. Some participate in that religion, some do not. Some are secular Jews. Some are Orthodox, conservative. We have as many stripes to Judaism as there are to Christianity. And so religion is a subset of Jews. But racism is a kind of biological ism. And as far as Adolf Hitler was concerned, if you had one Jewish grandparent, you had, and I quote, Jewish blood, and you were sent to the gas chambers. That is racism. It is a biological definition used to other and to hate and to objectify. And so ultimately, that's what we're talking about here, is the objectification of human beings. And that's what makes evil possible.
So my husband is 99.8% Ashkenazi Jew. And I've had to explain to people because he was raised, he present day is very agnostic, but he's Jewish and has experienced Jew hatred, as you would say. And I have wanted to consider kind of honoring the heritage because I grew up in a church and want my children to know my own family traditions, but I love that in a world where there are so few Jewish people that my kids are half Jewish. So I have convinced my husband that we are going to introduce the faith so we can have both. And I would ask, a little out of order here, but how do you recommend families who want to embrace multiple faiths without confusing children?
Well, I don't think you can.
Okay.
I don't think it's sometimes you have to wear your seatbelt and sometimes you don't. I think it's not quite as binary as you're presenting it. So I think that what's best, if you were sitting in my office now, in a very gentle and methodical way, I'm going to I would say this to you, but I'm going to do it quickly here because you don't have that kind of time. Look, I can tell you that the children who are raised as both end up on the couch in my office when they're 25 telling me they don't feel like both, they feel like neither.
Okay.
Like, why the hell couldn't my parents decide? Who am I? Were they conflicted? Were they unable to resolve this difference about how they wanted to raise their children? Because, to be honest with you, Sarah, there are many similarities between Judaism and Christianity, but there are fundamental differences.
Yes.
They're fundamentally different. And to say that you're both is like saying you're a vegetarian who eats meat. It's definitionally impossible. No. It's not culturally impossible.
Right.
So in other words, what I would advocate is you and your husband, and this might sound odd for the rabbi to be saying, but I think, look, if I don't know how old you are, but I'm probably close to old enough to be your father.
I doubt it.
I don't know. You look young to me. I would say, look, I would rather have you raise good, solid, faithful Christian kids than both. And I would rather have you raise good, solid, consistent Jewish kids than both. Choose one. Now, does that mean, let's just say you decide with your husband, we're going to raise our kids as Jews, we're going to educate them as Jews. Does that mean you pretend mommy is something else? No, you don't pretend mommy is something else. This is who I am. This is where I came from. But daddy and I, because we thought it best for you and our family, we have made the decision that you will be A or you will be B. Okay?
Okay.
That is what I think results in the most solid young adults when that time comes.
Okay. Now, I also heard a quote which leads me here, because I am a believer. I don't know necessarily, I don't believe in the things I was taught necessarily in the church, biblically, factually so. I believe in,
The Bible is not about facts.
right. I believe in greater lessons and truths without literal facts.
I do too.
So I'm a believer. My husband is agnostic. And a part of us, the more I've studied religion in college in those years, I also studied Native American traditions. I love Buddhism, Hinduism, all these. And once a friend of mine who's Muslim, her dad met a Christian woman and they were getting married. And the grandma couldn't accept them and went to her minister or priest and said that she was struggling with it. And he said, we're all finding different ways to get to the same place. As a rabbi, because I actually believe in the multiple gods of Native Americans, I don't see that as sinful because there are many gods. I absolutely believe in the God I got to know in my heart would not just have us born into the right answer and then other people not. So in some ways, is that not what you're saying, that we'll end up maybe in the same place, but just different ways of getting there?
Well, yes, but if you expect two paths to take you,
Then you're
that dissonance might result in you never getting there.
right. Like it's
Okay.
too much of riding the fence.
Yes. And so I think, yes, there are many paths to a spiritual life, and we can talk about what that means. But I think being on multiple paths, especially when children are young, doesn't create the result that you hope it will. And then later in life, they're going to have to do all of this
And figuring
searching,
out. Yep.
and they're going to have to deal with the cognitive dissonance
Right.
um, of who am I going to choose, mom or dad? And all of that. So I'm just telling you, look, this is what it means to be a parent. It's to make the hard decisions for your kids. And these people who tell me, we're going to expose them to everything, and when they grow up, it's like, are you out of your freaking mind? We're going to let them eat everything, and then when they get older, they'll decide if they want to be fat or they don't want to be fat or whatever. We're going to let them try everything. We're not going to guide our kids toward the path we think leads them to be the best human being. No, we're going to let them, they'll figure it out when they're older. Well, maybe, but probably not, and probably not without a lot of anger toward their parents
So
who didn't step up to parent.
rather than two religions, what if we were to take the religion we know? Because I was raised in it. My husband was not. And I take my religion, but we honored some of the traditions, because the Seder dinners, I'd love to be able to teach my kids. Because if I knew I had 50% of something so rare in this world, I would be really upset with my parents if they didn't teach me a little bit about what that meant.
I think they should be exposed to it.
Yeah.
And this is, but I do think you have to be careful because, for example, I'm asked all the time, will you come and lead a Seder for us at our church during Passover? And I say, no, I'll do it before Passover or after Passover.
Right.
But that is a misappropriation.
Okay.
And it's the same way I feel about Jews, who say, well, I want to have a Christmas tree and all of that. I said, well, that's pretty insulting to Christians, for whom Christmas is a deeply religious holiday, many of them.
Yeah.
And you're misappropriating it. Like, how would you feel? I'll ask you this as a Christian. I think there's a degree of respect that's required here. How would you feel if I was at a church and I decided to take communion?
Well, so I'm not locked to communion
I
as
know you're not. No, I'm
yeah,
asking separately, okay?
separately.
I'm
Okay.
in a Catholic church.
Oh,
I'm
Catholic
a
church.
rabbi. I'm fully Jewish.
Yep.
I'm in line, and I don't do this.
Yep. Well,
I
I
do
say you got to get behind me because they won't even let me do communion in a
that.
Catholic church.
But why won't they let you? Because in America, there's this feeling like, there should be no boundaries. What that does is it erodes, if not destroys, the sanctity and authenticity
Yep.
of everything. And I think my kids are 30 and 33. They don't feel this way because of how we raise them, but most of their friends do. Most of their friends were raised by Jewish parents who taught their kids, for whatever reason, that differences are bad. And they live in a culture that teaches. The majoritarian culture in America is that differences are bad. It's all one, man. It's all cool. It's all cool. It's all good. We're, you know, and we have lost this feeling of being proud of our differences.
Yeah.
And this realization that it's our differences that make us beautiful. You know, what makes America beautiful? It's brotherhood and sisterhood from sea to shining sea. In other words, it's when we appreciate and uphold the beauty of each other's uniqueness, each other's difference. That's what makes America beautiful, not some homogenous
Right.
glob.
Well, it's funny because I always said rather than a melting pot, it was more of a tossed salad. Like I thought, like when you look
Or
at
a
this
mosaic.
country,
A mosaic is good.
yes, something very colorful and
A
beautiful because
stained glass window is beautiful.
yes,
A window of one color, of one shape, one size, it's not that interesting. So, and instead of denigrating and attacking each other for our differences, we need to get to a place where we celebrate each other for our differences. But that means you have to be clear there's a difference.
yep.
And
It's kind of like what you were saying about riding the fence. It ultimately dilutes it and there's nothing left.
that's right.
So to not honor it, and it's okay if it's a little rigid and has boundaries, but without it, it's blends right in.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, I know that I'm moving on to a topic that I know you've written books on and is kind of an existential question I think so many of us ask ourselves all the time. You've presided over thousands of funerals and sat with thousands of grieving families after they've lost a loved one. You've written books about contemplating, preparing for confronting death. What have you learned most about being with people at such a raw and yet profound moment?
I wish I had said this, but I didn't. Kafka said it. Kafka said the meaning of life is that it ends. And it really is that simple. There is a kind of living, a kind of truth, a kind of value to life that can only be understood and appreciated in contradistinction to death. Death strips away a lot of nonsense. Death is the great teacher. In fact, I think death may be the only real teacher of life. And that's not to say that the lessons are necessarily worth it. What I'm saying is it's death that enables them to make them something other than worthless. Right? So one of the books I wrote about this topic is called The Beauty of What Remains. I appreciate aspects of my life in such a deep and profound way that I did not before my father died 4 years ago. You know, the death that you referred to that I've experienced was all vicarious. I learned a few things, Sarah, but it wasn't until Steve Leder, the rabbi, confronting death, became Steve Leder, the son, confronting death, that I really started to live. And I can tell you exactly when it happened. And you can cut this if it's too long a story.
No, I want to hear it.
So my father died 4 years ago in Minneapolis. He had Alzheimer's for 10 years. And people with that disease, they died twice.
Yep.
And both are shocking. My father dies. I fly back to Minneapolis. I'm one of 5 kids. We're all married and have our own kids. And so it's a pretty big family. And we're sitting in the synagogue in this side room, I think it was the library, waiting for the rabbi to come in and take us into the chapel to see my father's body in his casket before it's closed. And then they would let everyone in and we would begin the service. In Minneapolis, they do the service in the synagogue, and then you drive to the cemetery. The young rabbi walks in, and I remember thinking to myself, I know exactly how the rabbi feels right now, but I have no idea how I feel. And then he walked us in, and I approached my dad's casket. Now, keep in mind, like, I had stood next to grieving families looking at their loved one's body literally 1,000 times before this. And honestly, Sarah, like, I could have eaten a sandwich. It's like, I was there to help and be present and everything else, but it wasn't my loved one in that casket. So I approached the casket, and I put my hand on my dad's chest because I wanted to touch him, but I didn't want to feel how cold I knew his body was. Now, to understand this, you have to know that my dad and I have looked almost exactly the same throughout our lives. So if you saw a picture of him at 15 and a picture of me at 15, you, other than the clothing, you couldn't tell the difference. See these bags? This is my dad. So I'm looking at my dad's body in the casket, and my first thought was, this is how I'm going to look when I'm dead, and my son is bending over my casket with his hand on my chest. I am going to die. Despite having had all that experience with so much death, it wasn't until that moment that I realized I am going to die. And that realization, that piercing of the denial of death, has made my life exponentially more beautiful. And as I said, is it worth it? No, I'd rather have my dad back.
Right.
I'd rather be able to call him up and tell him the filthiest joke I heard today.
I like your dad already.
Yeah, you would. Yeah, is it worth it? No. My job is to make sure it isn't worth less. Dostoevsky said his greatest fear, this is a very powerful idea, his greatest fear was that his life would not be worthy of his suffering. That's a very powerful idea. We all suffer. We all go through some kind of hell. There are many kinds of hell.
Yep.
Right? There's the hell of disease, the hell of cancer, the hell of divorce, the hell of a kid in trouble, the hell of a ruined reputation, the hell of being betrayed or betraying. There are many types of hell. We all go through hell. The goal is not to come out empty-handed. That's the purpose. And so my father's death ennobled my life. And no, it wasn't worth it. And no, I'm not going to allow it to be worthless. So this is why I'm so interested in what it means that we all die. What does that mean for life?
Does that also mean, though, if you had been there 1,000 times, that close to all of this, and nothing prepared you for it until your dad passed, does that mean that none of us can truly internalize that lesson until we've been that close to death?
I think it does. You know, I've always wanted to write a book called How to Have Your Second Child First. Right?
Yeah.
Great title.
Totally great title.
Impossible book to write.
Yeah.
Because you cannot have your second child first. It's impossible. It is definitionally impossible. So did I know, look, I wasn't a complete failure at guiding people through loss, because loss is an extreme form of many other types of pain, right? A divorce is a death. A miscarriage is a death. A ruined reputation is a death. So there are many types of sort of miniature or faux deaths. There are many types of losses. There are many endings of eras in our lives. So it's not that I knew nothing, but I didn't know it in the deepest, most powerful kind of way, nor do I think it's possible until you experience the death of one of the core relationships in your life.
Well, I know in those instances where you helped people through this, there were things you learned.
Yes.
And I want to ask you about one of the things you see the most as a regret towards the end, and how people can channel as much as they can before they have to find it on the deepest level. What can we take with us to get a little step closer to living fully the way you
Yeah.
expressed?
Well, okay. So you're actually referring to what is the first question in my most recent book, which is the subtitle is 12 Essential Questions to Tell a Life Story. So I've been sitting with families for 35 years trying to get to the truth of their loved one's life, to prepare a eulogy and to prepare them for whatever they're saying and the experience, right? So, and the truth, not the facts. You know, it's very smart what you said earlier about you're not a believer in facts, you're a believer in truths. I read the Bible that way also. When I used to teach a class at the seminary in Los Angeles called homiletics, which is a fancy word for how to write sermons, wedding addresses, and eulogies. And whenever I got to the eulogy section in the syllabus, I would write on the board, an obituary is the facts, a eulogy is the truths.
Mhm.
The fact that I was born in St. Louis Park, Minnesota on June 3rd in 1960, that's a fact. But other than my age, it tells you nothing. Now, if I were to say to you, when I was a little boy and the stress of my parents' marriage and my fear of my father was something I couldn't take, and when I couldn't take it, I'd get in our canoe and go canoeing on the Minnehaha Creek that ran behind our home, and then I found solace in nature, and that I still seek solace in nature. Now you know a truth about me. So we want to get to the truth, and so these questions are about revealing a person's truth for two reasons. One, you leave a beautiful legacy for your loved ones, but also, this is to the point of your question, if you ask and answer certain questions for yourself and your loved ones, but now let's talk about why you would answer them for yourself. What you get is kind of an MRI of your internal life, your truth. Okay, and then you get to ask yourself the most important question we can ask of ourselves, which is, okay, this is my truth. This is what I say I believe. Am I living that way? Or is my life mostly kabuki? Because that's a painful way to live. So regret. What do most people regret? In the chapter on regret, here's what I discovered. What most people regret most at the end of their life is not something they did. It's something they didn't do. There are two types of, in religious terms, we would say sins. In secular terms, mistakes. There are two types of mistakes people make in life. There are mistakes of commission, the things we do.
Yep.
But there are many mistakes of omission, the things we fail to do, the time we didn't show up, the words we didn't say, the path we didn't take. And what I would urge people, I actually preached about this during our High Holy Days this past year. I gave a sermon about the mistake and the sin of omission. You know, most people regret staying on the sideline for something.
Yeah.
Well, what's yours? What's your greatest regret in your life? What do you really regret the most?
I right now would say lost time in the decade mainly of my 20s, when I missed out on a lot of life moments at the expense of a sense of duty for building a career. And I look back a lot and realize that those memories of my friends' weddings that I went to high school with, the trips, the all of that, I now look at it and I see that it was the wrong path. It wasn't fulfilling. It got me somewhere and I can be grateful and look back, but I would do it differently.
Yeah. So what essentially you regret things you didn't do.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
And there's a lot to teach your children by telling them that story.
Now, I have a question for you that might be the toughest one yet, but the one that kind of is right under every question when you come to religious leaders and people. What do you think happens when we die?
I'll take it as far as I can, because the truth is there's only one way to find out, and no one's coming back to tell us, right? By the way, which is the genius of some forms of Christianity, because you have to die to realize the doctrine, so no one can come back and say it isn't true. So it's brilliant, really.
Yes.
Here's what I do know. And again, this is coming from someone who has looked at 1,000 dead bodies. It is so clear to me that our bodies are not who we are. If you've ever seen a dead body, I don't know if you have.
I have.
You have. So you know, you're looking there, that is not the person. That is an empty vessel. There is so much more to us than our bodies. You can use whatever word you want to describe it. I don't get hung up on religious terminology. Call it a soul, call it a spirit, call it an energy, call it a presence. It doesn't matter what you call it. We all know there is a non-physical, a non-corporeal component to who we are, and it is more of who we are than the way we look. That, I believe, outlives our bodies. Now, where does it go? What does it mean? I don't know. How could I?
Right.
And when people say, well, you live on in memory, sort of, it's kind of bullshit though, because when the last person alive who ever knew you dies, what does that mean? Is that when you die? I don't think so. Is that when your soul dies? Because no one is left on earth who remembers you? I don't think so. And of course, on the most basic level, there's a DNA component to it. You. There's a great Yiddish writer, Isaac Bashevis Singer, who said, every person is a cemetery. You carry within you all of your ancestors who came before you. Now, he is biologically correct in terms of your DNA. You are a walking vessel of everyone who came before you, who created who you are genetically. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. And you also carry the ethos of all of that and add to it. And so that's as far as I can go. And I will tell you, for me, it's far enough.
Yeah. Well, I have a question for you, because one thing that, what kids ask heavy questions. I have a 6, 4, and 3-year-old, and death is something that surprisingly comes up a lot and younger than I would have anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, just the other day, my kids were kind of bickering at the table, and my son Alex said, when we die, we come back as babies. Every time they try to tell me what death looks like, they have themselves back in my tummy. Because my oldest said one time when he got mad, he's like, when I come back, I'm not coming back in your belly. And I was like, oh my gosh, that really hurt. But then my little girl tells me that we're coming back as animals. We're going to come back as animals. And what animal do you want to be? And they go back and forth and back and forth. And then they say, Mama, what do you think? And it's so hard for me to answer this because there's not a clear answer. I don't grasp what that answer is. I have feelings, and my feelings line a lot to what you just described. There's an energy or something in there that I don't see ever ending. But I don't know. I love the beautiful innocence of some people, a friend of mine that passed here at the show, her mom and dad passed. And she said, whenever she sees a deer, she really feels she's looking at her mom. And whenever she sees a butterfly, she thinks she knows it's her dad. And so there's something beautiful in every instance of this, that how do I offer honesty while also letting them know they're okay and that this is all part of it?
Okay. First of all, it's a smart, really smart question because it implies that you know better than to dispossess them of their own mythology. Remember, myth doesn't mean lie. A myth is a way of describing a truth. When people say, oh, that's a myth, well, then it means it's a way of describing an eternal truth about the human condition. So your notion not to dispossess them or refute their mythology is exactly the right one. That's really interesting. Tell me more about that. Now, if it's something really wacky, you might say, a lot of people believe that. And some people believe this. And some people believe this. But mommy, what do you believe? Well, no one can be sure, but this is what I think. So you should just be honest and share it with them without refuting their own perspective. Because why? We know a lot about brain development and spirituality. Okay, children at the ages of your children, they are not capable of imagining anything more than that. They're
Right.
also, by the way, this is a huge theological problem. They're also not capable of imagining anything other than an omniscient, omnipotent God that's like a superhuman. They can't go further than that. The problem most adults have is they walk out into the adult world with the theology of a 5-year-old because no one has ever taught them anything between the age of 5 and when the car accident, happens and someone dies, and what they're operating with the theology of a 5-year-old, which is, oh, God's in charge. So if God's in charge, this is God's fault and I'm out. So
Yes.
it's really, they're expressing something quite deep in their own way, which is that I would look, I mean, a theologian would say what they're talking about is the transmigration of the soul. Now, you're not going to say that to them, but it's actually pretty beautiful what they're talking.
Yeah.
And I'd get out of the way and let it flower. But be honest with them about you. Now, this is just a hunch, but they may also be really wondering, are you going to die, mommy?
So I've answered that before. And I have said that we all eventually die, like the leaves on a tree, and like when we see the winter, the fall becomes winter, the winter becomes spring, and that everyone is going to do that at some point. But when they ask them what about themselves, I always say that will hopefully be so long from now. You will be an old man or woman. And so I try to I want to offer them a safety that the odds are, you hope it's not
Yeah,
tomorrow,
yeah.
but I don't know if anyone ever was that honest about death. And I think it might be why, like everyone, I really struggled with losing people.
Well, your instincts again are right on. I think that, you want to ladder it out, your death, you want to ladder it out for them. Like, yes, mommy's going to die, but first, I mean, you have to graduate 6th grade and then you're going to go to middle school. And then you're going to go to high school. And when you're 16, you're going to get your driver's license and be driving. And then you're at 18, you're going to be able to vote and do other things. And then you're going to go off to college and study things that interest you. And then after that, you'll be able to find some kind of work that you want to do that's interesting for a job, like mommy and daddy go to work. And then maybe we hope you'll someday fall in love with someone and maybe want to be with that someone and start a family. And then you'll be the mommy or the daddy and I'll be the grandma. And so you want to give them a sense of just how long
Okay.
really is, but you're also telling them the truth, right? That yes, but all these things are going to happen first. So easy. Now, do we know you could get hit by a truck tomorrow? Yes. But you don't have to say that to a 6, 4, and 2-year
Right.
old, right?
Right.
It is appropriate when kids are that young to tell them the plane is not going to crash.
Right.
I mean, we know it might, but you don't tell a little kid, well, statistically, we're probably going to be okay, but yeah, planes crash. You don't say that. You say the plane is not going to crash.
We're fine today.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So ladder it out. And be honest. Do you remember how old you thought your mom was when she was your age?
Oh my gosh. It's crazy. Like I'm now overlapping. I remember my mom and dad at these ages, and that's a
Yeah.
little mind blowing.
And you thought they were really old, right?
Yes. How sad was that? They were really cool and I didn't know it.
Yeah, well, nobody really knows their parents until much later. And
Right.
sometimes it's not the greatest of revelations, but it is important to understand they're human. Uh, and how old did you think your grandparents were?
My, I think my grandma had white hair prematurely because my whole life she had white hair, but she wasn't 90 until the end. Like, yet
But
she
you
looked,
thought,
I
as
thought she
as
was,
a 6-year-old, you thought, well, so you want to give them that comfort that it
yeah,
is going to happen, but when I'm all the way old.
really old.
Exactly.
Yes. Now,
Exactly.
Steve, you are, first of all, fascinating, and I could talk to you forever. So there might be a part deux to this, but I do want to end this with a little bit of a game called Just Curious Rapid Fire Questions. Okay.
Shoot, shoot.
Okay. What is something that brought you joy today?
The rain.
What do you wish you could tell your younger self?
Other people don't have to be wrong for you to be right.
What's your biggest fear?
Poverty.
What book do you think should be required reading?
At what age?
Uh,
Adults?
I'd say adults.
Adults? Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
That's my next book. What's on your bucket list?
Living at peace with my beautiful wife in the Joshua Tree Desert without the anxiety of work.
If today was your last day, what was your regret of something you didn't do?
Retire sooner.
Who has impacted you the most in this life?
My dad.
What is something you're curious about right now?
It's strange that one would trip me up, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm so focused on output that I don't really give a lot of thought to the input part of it. I'm curious. Well, this is related to the retirement part, but I'm curious about the next chapter in my life.
Okay. Thank you. This has been ridiculously enlightening. And you've helped me so much because one concrete thing I take in addition to all the existential kind of things I have to think about would be that how to raise the kids with religion. And that is not something I've heard from anyone. So I really appreciate that and all your other answers. You've got my brain going. I've got my next book at the top of my reading list. So I want to say a big thank you to Rabbi Steve Leder for taking the time out to chat with me. And for everyone watching, his latest best-selling book, For You When I Am Gone, is available for purchase wherever books are sold. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Really, I really appreciated it. And anytime, okay?
Okay, you're going to regret that.
I don't regret it. You're pushing on an open door with me, okay?
Amazing. Thank you really so much for taking this time. And I'm going to do an intro with all your other stuff in it, and we'll make sure you see this when we post.
Anytime. I'm going to call Tammy right now.
Tell her she's going to die.
I will. All right.
Thank you.
Bye, Sarah.
Bye. Big things can happen if you remain curious. How curious are you? I'll see you next time.